news for the good of the order that you'd like to share with assembled? We did. Anything else? Right, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome, as you have read, I believe, our presenter this evening, Justin Free, took a fabulous trip on the Tour du Mont Blanc with a number of AMC friends last year, and he's here to tell us all about it. And I've had a sneak preview of some of the pictures, so I can tell you you're in for a treat. Justin, welcome.
Thank you, Larry. I already have one. Hi, everyone. I'm Justin Free. I've been an AMT member for many years. I've also volunteered for there. And yes, as Lenny mentioned, okay. It was just. Oh, now it's working.
You have to turn it off and turn it back.
Okay. Oh, that's way better. And this has a little pointer. Yeah, there it is, Mont Blanc. So I'm sure everyone's kind of familiar with this map, but there it is, Western Alps. I like this map because it's obviously an elevation relief map, but it shows the exact kind of cluster of mountains that we were hiking around. See that little sort of oval shaped, trending northeast, southwest. That is Mont Blanc and its surrounding peaks that we circumnavigated. Lake Geneva. Yeah. So, has anybody here either hiked the Tour du Mont Blanc or heard of it and pictures of it? All right, what can you tell me about it? Okay. What about you? What did you hear about it?
Oh, I think,
Oh, okay.
and my first international trip and this one, Carla, probably the craziest takeaway from it was in Chamonix.
Yeah.
We were allowed to use the community pool.
It's like if you go golf and you have to wear, khaki shorts at a certain length. Well, I guess while in Chamonix,
Yeah. Right, no, but it was a wonderful.
So the Tour du Mont Blanc is an approximately 110-mile trekking route through the heart of the Western Alps. It goes over numerous passes or cols, they say, down into quaint little alpine villages. It's a challenge. lot of elevation, between 30 and 40,000 feet of elevation, and it goes through 3 countries. It wasn't working. Okay. No. The laser pointer still works. No. Okay. So there it is. There's a close-up of that very sort of little oval shape. And in fact, there's also a map on that little table over there showing the route. But there it is. It's a circumnavigation of Mont Blanc and the Mont Blanc Massif and its auxiliary peaks. So you can see here the elevation range on the tour itself. So it's a big range. The peak itself is 15,774 feet, 3 countries. And then there are some logistics. There are a variety of ways you can bring a tent, you can bring a stove, and you can just do the whole thing. You can resupply at villages you go through. You can buy some food at the refuges along the way, but you can kind of do it on the cheap. On the flip side, you can probably spend every night in a hotel and not really have to make any of your own food. So the option that we chose was somewhere in the middle, a little closer to the hotel than the tenting, but we stayed in a combination of hotels, refuges, and chalets. So for the most part, we had private rooms, but sometimes it was bunk style or hostel style type of lodging. So the question was, what's the definition of a refuge? Like a partially sort of stocked hut with accommodations. So typically bunk style, or like, rooms of 4 to 6 people, that would accommodate 4 to 6 people. And they typically had a kind of a restaurant as well. And they're all over this route. They're all over the Alps, for that matter. These little mountain huts in the most improbable places, at 8,000 feet, near a glacier on a steep slope, there it is. It gets, the supplies get brought in by hand, sometimes helicoptered in. They're all over the place. So we stayed at a kind of combination of some of these places, minus the tents. And we also had the luxury of not having to carry heavy backpacks with us, because we had hired a travel agency or guide service that schlepped the bulk of our gear from one hotel or lodge to the other. So all we had to carry was a day pack with the day, enough food for the day, water. Even that, you wouldn't eat enough food enough water for the entire day, because there are places to fill up the water, during the course of each day's hike. And just, the clothes that you might need for that day. So it was super easy, that part of it anyways. I did a lot of backpacking when I was younger. And so this to me was like a day pack every day. I get used to this.
There you go. All right.
So this is actually a photo on day 2, but it's one of the only photos I have of everyone in the trip. So from left to right, we have Jing, that's me, Dennis, Julie, Mike, Marcy, my wife Corey, Carla, Amy, Lisa, Larry, and Dave. So perhaps while I'm here, I will mention that this trip wouldn't have happened had it not been for Julie and Marcy, who came up with the idea for the trip, and then did all the legwork as far as finding a guide service, which was Pygmy-Elephant, to help craft the itinerary, to help to deal with the baggage transfers. So they did all of that work. And it was substantial. There were a lot of tweaks, you know, as the weeks and months progressed, and as we got close to, you know, the embarkation time, there was just a lot of back and forth, I know, between really Julie and Pygmy-Elephant, just to make sure everything was how we wanted it and everything went smooth. So many thanks to them. So here some of us are, my wife and me, Amy and Larry up there, Dennis and Julie, in the airport, either Philadelphia, or I know some people flew out of Newark or maybe Baltimore, Washington, you know, all smiles and toasts before embarking for Europe. There's Marcy and Mike, and Dave's over there with the little funny look over there. Now, what's funny about this is, little did he know what an ordeal he was going to face when his plane landed in London Heathrow. So I don't know how, you know, if you were following the news much, but last year Heathrow was a mess. They were canceling flights. Left, right, and center, leaving people stranded. So when Dave and Lisa, and I think several others, I think Jing and maybe a few other travelers got to Heathrow, they had to, you know, their flight from Heathrow to Geneva was canceled, and you know, they had to wait, just sit there and try to sleep for hours. What's that? Did they, to then get back to, okay, which is where Corey and I went, and we had this experience on the left. You know, walking out of the plane, which was beautiful. We walked out of the plane under tarmac, which doesn't happen anymore. So I actually set foot in Spain for the first time in my life, while Lisa and Jing were trying to catch some Z's in the airport. Not only did they have those delays though, but they lost Dave's luggage. So he had to go without luggage for the first half of the trip.
Oh, no.
So so here we are finally in Chamonix. Now, some people got to Chamonix. Chamonix was the starting and ending point of the trip. Some people got there a day early, or some people had intended to get there a day early, only to get there a day on time or a day late because of the travel delays. Corey and I, since we have a 6-year-old at home, we had to kind of condense the trip and not have any extra days in the front or back end of the trip. So we got to Chamonix in the afternoon. Our flight went through Madrid to Geneva, and then we took a shuttle bus to Chamonix. But if you've never been to Chamonix, man, is it stunning. I have been to a lot of mountain towns in this country. I've been to, you know, Steamboat Springs. I've been to Tahoe. I've been to Telluride, a lot of those places. And those places, Jackson Hole, those places are absolutely gorgeous. Chamonix takes it to another level. The mountains are right there. They're incredibly high. They're covered in snow and glaciers. And the town itself is just about as cute as can be.
Two questions.
Yes.
What time of year? Yeah.
Early July.
Okay. And what shuttle tickets do you get from Geneva to Chamonix?
So the question is, what time do you do the trip? That was early July, July 4th, I think, 3rd or 4th to the 15th, something like that. And what shuttle we took from Geneva to Chamonix. So my wife and I took the Alpine bus. It's variously named other things. In fact, when we ordered it, it's like it might come with a different name, but it's the same thing. And it was, you know, public transportation. It was a little, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 seater bus, relatively inexpensive. And it's about an hour and 15 minutes from Geneva to Chamonix. It's a beautiful ride too.
Okay. So I do have a question on that. Did you make those arrangements in advance? Just pick up that shuttle at the airport?
I booked it in advance. Yeah.
Now?
Yes. Okay. Couple more photos of Chamonix. So obviously it was kind of late afternoon when we got there, so the sun was starting to set.
but we went into town and had a meal, and Chamonix is a super interesting place. Obviously, it's extremely touristy, but it's kind of one of the only places I can think of where, you know, you might be sitting at a little roadside cafe. On one hand is some, you know, wealthy fashion designer from Paris. On the other hand is, you know, like a crunchy mountain guy who just spent the day, you know, ice climbing at 13,000 feet. And actually, there's a fantastic little chapter on Chamonix in one of John Krakauer's early books called Eiger Dreams. He has a chapter devoted to Chamonix. Now, that book was written in the 80s or 90s, so Chamonix has probably changed since then. It's probably gotten bigger, more touristy, more expensive. But I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining. It has an incredibly rich mountain climbing history. I mean, the kids in that area, they don't play basketball, they don't play pee-wee soccer, they climb, and they ski. It's a totally different culture. This is where we spent the first night, Hotel La Morgane. And then the following morning, we began the actual trip. And we started not by hiking, but by taking a gondola ride up 2,500 feet. When we got off the gondola ride, this was our setting here. It was like we just had to stop and take it all in. You know, we were up at, probably 6,000 feet at that point elevation, and just had unobstructed views to Mont Blanc and the various high peaks surrounding it. It was just phenomenal. That shows the cable car. So where we stopped was not the high point of the cable car. It kept going to that little, you see that little kind of promontory on the rock. That's the end of the cable car. So these things are all over the Alps. At least the part of the Alps that we traveled in. Seems like no, you know, high remote cliff is off limits for, hey, let's put a cable car here. Not for the faint of heart, I guess, if you're not good with heights. So this kind of gives you the sense of scale. There's my wife Corey on that grassy knoll. It's just the mountains are so big. It's so vertical. The terrain is so vertical there. So from the point where we got dropped off by the cable car, we did have a climb of probably 1,500 feet or so to our first kind of summit called Le Bremont. There's a little summit plaque there. And for the rest of the day, we gradually descended down to a little town called Les Ouches, which was the place where we spent the night that night. But most of that day's hike was above tree line and on a ridge line across that valley. Remember that first picture of kind of the map? We were just on the, I guess there wasn't a photo that showed it close enough up, but we're now on a ridge line directly across from Mont Blanc and the other high peaks. So it's like unobstructed views of the Mont Blanc massive all day long. That was the kind of the character of the trail that we hiked on that day. And our first stop at a refuge, one of the many refuges. So we stopped here and got something to eat, something to drink. In the next photo, there is, you can see the view that we had was just, you know, inescapable, difficult to put into words how beautiful it was. Dave there looks like he's very skeptical about the beer he's about to drink. And maybe that's because the beer in that part of the world is not exceptional. I can see going there for the wine, but not the beer. If you're an IPA fan like me, pretty much all blonde ales. Let you guys guess what that might be. I believe that was at that little refuge. That was Bella Shah. So this is more just the views we had that day. That is Chamonix and the valley it sits in. And this picture, unfortunately, does not have the highest peaks. They're cut off. But can anyone guess what the relief is from anyone who hasn't already been there, from the valley that Chamonix sits in up to Mont Blanc, which you can see directly from Chamonix. Any guesses?
12,307.
Oh, I should have made that print smaller. You know, it was tiny on my computer. I could have made it on there. Yeah, and then, all right, I challenge you guys to think of other places in the world that might have a relief similar to that or greater than that. You're not gonna find it in the lower 48.
Everest? Is Everest?
Nepal, probably the Andes. I'm sure there's some place in the Andes. Denali, sure. There isn't a single place in the lower 48. Maybe Canada, Mount St. Elias, maybe, but the relief is stupendous. I mean, over 12,000 feet, unbroken, climb from valley to valley.
I got a question. When you get up around that elevation, did you have any people with issues with that elevation? I mean, you're up to pretty high.
Yeah. So the question is, did anybody have issues with altitude? We were never up at 15,700 feet. The highest we went was 8,300, 8,400 as a group, and I went up a little hill up to 8,900 feet just to do it. And that, I don't think any of us felt the effect of elevation. We also eased into it. Most of us spent a night or two in Chamonix, which is at almost 4,000 feet. And then, I think if anything, if we were tired, it was because of the terrain, the challenge of the hiking, not because of the elevation. And most people anyways only really begin to feel something around 8,000 feet. Although I've heard that if you fly from sea level to Denver, some people get a little bit ahead, but no, altitude wasn't really
I guess
a
you're
problem.
doing maybe something with 15,000.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, you can get seriously ill at 50,000. Absolutely, and even lower than that. Yeah, but by the time Lake Vermont may have been, that was the first kind of place we got, was probably not more than 7,000 feet. So by the time we got up to the highest point on the Tour du Mont Blanc, we had our trail legs, and we had already been at 5, 6, 7,000 feet. We've been kind of living in that elevation. So this was our first night's accommodation. Although there's plenty of that in that part of the world. That was more like it.
Yeah.
So it was a pleasant accommodation, very sort of lodge-like. And the thing I remember most about this place was, for dinner, it was kind of buffet style, but instead of everyone going up simultaneously and getting their food at the buffet tables, there was a sort of a well-dressed, courteous Frenchman there, taking our orders. So we would go up to him and say, "Oh, well, I would like that. I would like that. I would like," the whole process took a long time. So it was a kind of introduction into what a process the European dinner is. Yes. I mean, in this country, what do you do for an evening? Well, you go out to dinner and you kind of get that out of the way, and then you go to a movie or something else. In that part of the world, the meal is the entertainment. So we were probably there 2 or 3 hours.
Second question, I saw you left in Chamonix, but I saw the picture of the Lucas. Is that at the end, or did you actually make your way back down the Lucas and then?
We made our way back down to Les Zouches, apparently how they pronounce it.
Okay.
Which is, what I'll get to in a moment. Which is kind of the semi-official starting point. So we started like 1 day to the north.
Gotcha.
And there were a few reasons for that. But on day 2, we went through Les Zouches and the official kind of starting point of the Tour du Mont Blanc. On the left is just a picture of town, really cute. There was a farmer's market, open air farmer's market. We got some snacks for the day. These are the kind of trail signs you might find. That's one thing I didn't go over in the introduction is route finding. It's super simple. It's so well marked. I mean, these routes are so well traveled. There are a lot of intersecting trails because the Tour du Mont Blanc is not the only trail in this area. There's crisscrossing trails everywhere. I mean, there's millions of miles of trails in the Alps. But they are all very well marked with those TMB diamonds and arrows and various signs. They do, often the signage doesn't give you mileage to like the next location, whether it's a refuge or a call or a road crossing. It gives you the time that it takes to get there, which of course varies a lot. And what I will say is people who live there are fit. So take that with a grain of salt. Like, you know, in the Alps, something that's strenuous means like you need a helmet, crampons, ice axes, ropes, like you're gonna be doing multi-pitch verticals. You know, something easy in the Alps might be something that's like at my limit. It's a totally different rating stuff, you know, system. So the picture on the left here, you can see, although pictures never quite do justice, the steepness of the terrain. So, you know, we're kind of side hilling along this steep slope. And then we got our first little suspension bridge over a creek that is the outwash to a glacier. Now, this was actually on a variant. So some of us took a variant that day. And that's another thing I didn't mention, is there is the standard TMB route. But at multiple, you know, points along the trip, there are different variants you can take. Variants that take you higher, variants that take you lower, variants that are longer or harder or just different. So many of us decided to take a variant because it went to the toe of a glacier. Well, it went to the former toe of a glacier.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful variant. I'm incredibly glad that we did it for other reasons. That was the glacier kind of at a far in the distance, but we didn't get anywhere near the actual toe of the glacier. But we got to hike through some beautiful alpine meadows like this. I don't know what to say. It was just gorgeous. Things like, and the weather was beautiful almost every single day, which is something that we got very lucky. But you know, we had just on this day in particular, we had miles of hiking through terrain like this. The obligatory Larry selfie with the rest of us in the background. I will you know, take note of Larry's GPS. He's the GPS master. He always has everything downloaded. He must have like a VIP membership to all trails, like a special Larry membership, because his GPS is always like the most accurate and most up to date. He should probably be up here giving this talk because he's all the stats. He could tell you how many steps we took and how many mileage and elevation and everything else. But we, at this point, we were really getting pretty high up and we were approaching our first call, which is pretty much something we did every day. And we started in a valley at wherever accommodation we stayed at, and we hiked up to a pass or a call. This particular call, we saw our first ibex, first of many. And this was also the only time we were rained upon during the entire 12 days of the trip. So we were up there eating lunch and the clouds rolled in and it started raining. So we quickly wrapped up our lunch, donned our rain gear, and headed down the other side of the pass. And about halfway down the other side of the pass, the rain stopped, clouds lifted. This is looking back up at the pass, and you really can't tell from this perspective, but from there to there was very steep and had probably, I don't know, 50 switchbacks. So we were ready from here, where we are there, we're already descending probably 1,500 feet from that pass. And what awaited us on the other side? Another refuge. So, you know, took off our shoes, relaxed, kicked back, drank something. This was a highlight of the trip for me, not just the refuges in general, but this specific one. This was Chalet du Miage, something like that. Because we had that brief rain. It was kind of cold, windy, rainy. We really hustled down the mountain. And then it just opened up, it became sunny. This was our first, well, actually we had a refuge the previous day, but this was kind of unexpected. And just in this beautiful alpine valley, there's this refuge with seats and cold beer and wine and food and views of a glacier. It was just stunning. See, Marcy and Mike assuming the comfortable refuge pose. These little monuments, little stone sort of monuments to Catholicism were all over the place. I decided to just put them together here. but it seemed like every day or two we were passing these cute little, very humble monuments, Christian monuments. There we go. So Hotel La Cheminaise, which was our accommodation for the second night on the trip. This was a bit more ski lodge like. This was in the village of Lake Contamine, I believe. I do have all of these notes somewhere, but it's too much to look at them. We did get rain that night, actually a heavy thunderstorm, but we were all, safe and warm inside the hotel. Food was excellent everywhere we went. Yep, this is the following morning. So the following day's hike kind of had it all. We started off with kind of a very gradual hike along a gravel path that paralleled the stream. We even got to a point where there was a little gorge with some beautiful waterfalls. We passed, these little chapels, or this little chapel along the way. And then we gradually rose up from the sort of forested valley we were in. And we came to your quintessential alpine kind of meadow terrain. And our first classic, bells, or cows with bells.
Here, a half a mile away.
And here is a video. Oh, I have to click it twice, yeah. So the audio is pretty weak, unfortunately. You can still kind of just hear the cowbells. And these cowbells were a daily occurrence. I mean, they just fill the air. It becomes like, I'm sure a lot of people here, have nostalgia for the sound of a train. Maybe you're sleeping, you love that sound of a train passing. Well, there it's like the clanking bells of the cows. It's just the thing you hear. It's like the soothing noise. So, no presentation of the TMB would be complete without some pictures of wildflowers. The alpine meadows, of course, are unmatched anywhere else in the world. I mean, you go to the Rockies, and tree line in Colorado is 11,000 feet. So you really only have 3,000 feet that's above tree line before you get to the highest peaks, in 14s. And then you really get to the highest part, and it's really scree and rocks and things like that. So you may only have a band of 1,000 to 2,000 vertical feet that have these kind of meadows. Well, tree line in this part of the Alps is like 6,500 feet, and your peaks are 15,700. So you have vast areas of terrain, thousands of feet vertical of just, it's stunning with all the wildflowers. I couldn't name what these are. I think the one in the middle is a fireweed, because they grow ubiquitously in Alaska, but I don't know. But they're pretty. So as you can see, we are getting kind of higher up. We've sort of passed the lower alpine elevation up to another pass. This was the first snowfield, the first of only 2 snowfields that we crossed. So it was early July, and typically there would be more snow, but I think it was a low snow year the previous winter, and it got warm. So everyone was saying that these were really exceptionally kind of snow-free and dry conditions. July. No. I don't think anybody did. But that was a conversation that we had just before going. I think somebody reached out, probably Julie reached out to pygmy-elephant to ask, what are the conditions like on the ground? And they said, no microspikes. Because typically this is the time of year, if you decide to go, you would need microspikes. But there is no typical anymore.
Right.
So it's a proud wife after that long climb. This next stretch was one of my favorites, because when we had about a 1 to 2 mile kind of traverse at pretty high elevation, probably 7,500 feet, maybe even close to 8,000. So we were really up above it all. Beautiful views, great weather. It was just, And the other thing is we had just climbed probably 2,500 feet or even 3,000 feet to get to that pass. You know, the worst thing is to go right back down. It's like, you know, you gotta have some payoff for all that hard work. And it was really nice. We had this ridgeline traverse, stunning. We came to another refuge where we, you know, took a break, ate a big meal, even though we didn't necessarily need a big meal. You know, sometimes we're like, oh, well, we're here, we're gonna eat a meal. There's Dennis enjoying, you know, a cold one. Yeah, to me, this day kind of had a little bit of everything. It had, you know, in the morning we went through, you know, we saw those little chapels. We kind of went through the outskirts of the village where we had spent the previous night. You know, we rose up through the, you know, bucolic fields with cows and their bells up to the higher elevation and a traverse way above tree line. And then a descent to a little cafe, which was kind of the end point, a little town called Les Chapeaux, at the end of the day's hike, where we relaxed in the shade and we awaited our taxi. So on this night, we did not stay. It was the only night of the entire trip we did not stay like right along the trail. We actually took a taxi about 15 miles to a nearby town to stay in a hotel. Before we left, someone had some maybe somebody was missing home and had some very classically American fare. I mean, they do, well, you know, they do cater to tourists after all. This was also before we left on that taxi ride. There was a little tent city down there in that valley, right near that little cafe. And as I mentioned earlier, that's how, you know, a lot of people do this trip. This is where we stayed that night, Hotel Base Camp Lodge in Bourg St. Maurice. Beautiful town, kind of a ski town, but we all sort of agreed it felt a little strange to not be on the trail. You know, we were about 15 miles from the trail. And some people were crazy about the taxi drive from Les Chapeaux to Hotel Base Camp Lodge. It was a, you know, twisty, turny road, and yeah, they drive pretty fast. And you know what else is interesting? You know, there's obviously a huge cycling culture over there. The drivers are not really concerned with giving the cyclers a wide berth or even a respectful berth. I mean, it's like, I think some people in our group were kind of white knuckling this trip, taxi trip. So this is the next morning. Again, kind of got off to a sort of gradual start in the valley, slow climb along a creek. We crisscrossed this creek a few times, and there was a small, I don't have a photo of it, but there was a small sort of patch of ice, which is the only other sort of snow patch that we traversed. Cute little bridge across the creek. Here on the right, you know, you can tell we're kind of getting a little higher, kind of hitting these benches where we began to climb. And today's sort of pass for the day was a point. Was the first international border between France and Italy. So far we've been in France, and in Les Chapeaux, where we had spent the previous night, that was at the southwesternmost tip of the big oval that is the TMB route. So at that point, we made an abrupt, you know, acute angle turn in direction, and we're now heading instead of pretty much due south the previous day, we're now heading northeast toward Courmayeur, Italy. We passed another refuge, and on the right you can see the accommodations. Now this was one of the sort of more basic refuges. You can see just, you know, about half a dozen you know, beds just kind of right next to each other, and a little partition wall, and then some more. Most of them were, I would say, a little less rustic than that, but that kind of gives you an idea of some of the accommodations. And more French fare. This was a typical snack that we would have at the refuges along the way. No American cheese here. You know, that's something my wife and I talked about before going on this trip. I am not a fan of fancy cheeses. I'm a very, you know, American sharp cheddar, you know, maybe Swiss if I'm feeling adventurous. She loves the soft cheeses, so she was. So this is our first international border with Italy. And when you climb up to these passes, you get to the top of these calls, it reveals a whole new view. And, it's just as stunning as the next. I mean, and it's often we would debate, which view was the most stunning. We couldn't decide. They were all equally stunning. In fact, I remember reading in the guidebook that such and such was particularly, better than the rest. They were every part of every day was stunning. I can't really pinpoint one thing that stood out. They were all, the views were just, phenomenal. So there is Marcy on the left and Julie on the right. And that girl in the background, Marissa, you will hear more about later. She's a hiker that we kind of befriended along the route. So on the descent from that pass, we got to another refuge, except in Italy, they're called refugios. And of course, the scenery doesn't change. Nothing really changes, except you go from saying bonjour to buongiorno. And the refugees become refugios. And what's funny about this one is we had, descended quite a ways. We're kind of getting most of the way into the valley. And we came to this refuge, and we had seen it on our guidebook. Great, we'll get up to the pass, and we'll then have a short descent. And we'll get to, okay. And we'll get to a refuge. Well, when we got to this refuge, the trail actually only took us about 300 to 400 vertical feet below the refuge. We're like, oh, son of a bitch. You mean we have to climb up another 400 feet to get the refuge? This is how spoiled we were. Pretty much all of us did go up to the refuge, though, because the call of like an espresso or a beer or whatever outweighed the extra elevation. We're like, oh, man, really? It was beautiful. I mean, they had many of these have sort of decks or verandas with just these far-flung views. This was the last little bit of the sort of walk toward our accommodations that night. And one thing I forgot to mention is our accommodation that night was the one place along the entire trip where we did not have our bags with us. So we had this baggage service that schlepped our gear from accommodation to accommodation so that we only had to carry a day pack. This was the one place where they could not get our bags there because it was too remote. So we had to carry just a little bit more. I mean, we still had beds to sleep in that night and linens, although I think we all brought sleeping bag liners. But we had to pack, a little bit more with us. And the accommodations were a little bit simpler. I think most of us were in sort of quads. So 4 or 6 per people per bunk. And this is the little chalet that we stayed at, Cabane du Combal. Very cute, really idyllic little spot, beautifully situated at the toe of this glacier. And that afternoon, I actually hiked up to this little glacial lake, kind of up above the refuge. And what's interesting is, all you see there is debris, rocks and silt and whatnot, but it's all ice underneath. The glacier has been melting, and so what it's left behind is all the debris that it's scoured over the terrain over the past 15,000 years. And that's on top, but there is still ice underneath, and that lake is just basically a puddle in the ice. Go back. That night, Corey, my wife, and I got in a conversation with a Canadian couple, and we were talking for a while, had a lot of similar interests. We were all doing the TMB. And actually, I think that's me right now. I just noticed that. I'm laying down on that little bench. Yeah, that's my blue fleece or something like that. And while we were talking, one of the hosts of the Cabane du Combal, this tall Greek guy, he came out and kind of insinuated himself in the conversation and kind of proceeded to sort of unload all of his things that were, on his mind, things, that maybe he didn't feel comfortable. I don't know, maybe I looked like I was, somebody who's gonna be receptive to, is complaining about everything they had to deal with that summer, including, obnoxious tourists. But he was very, very well-meaning and pleasant, and we ended up talking with him for a while. But at a certain point, Corey and I had to be like, we're gonna go to bed, because I felt like it was about 11 o'clock and we were on a hiker's schedule, and I felt like he could have stayed up talking with us as long as he it's like he had found his audience, his willing audience, and he would have talked all night long. But interestingly, one thing I remember is the reason he came here from Greece is, despite the fact that they do have a sort of lodge and hiking options in Greece, apparently the pay over there is miserable. So he comes here to make a living. So the next morning, we saw a whole herd of ibex. Apparently, the area, and this was right in front of that lodge, and apparently that area had some sort of sodium or salt deposits where they congregated. So they were all over the place, running up and down, and it was really cool. I have a few more photos here of both ends of the ibex, coming and going. Yep. And this is a photo of a couple hours into the following day's hike, looking back at where we had just been. You see that tiny little brown speck? That's the Cabane du Combal. So right kind of at the edge of the glacier, you can see this massive glacier, probably 20 miles long, 25 miles long. And you can see most of it doesn't have ice on the surface anymore. There's still quite a bit of ice in there, but it's receding. But I thought this photo was great because it really shows the kind of the curve of the glacier. And you get a sense for just how damn big these things are. Actually, I think you can see the lake. Yeah, that's that tiny little lake that I went up to. Yeah, and there were more of them kind of sprinkled around. So this day, we also hiked kind of up and over, not so much of a col, but kind of got to a high point and then sort of side hilled around. And the day's destination was Courmayeur, which we were to spend 2 nights at. So it's kind of the halfway point. Distance-wise, not quite halfway, but pretty close. Some of the boring views along the way. Yeah, we did pass a ski place. We passed like ski runs toward the end of that hike before taking the cable car down. So yeah, we came to this another refuge. You're starting to see a pattern here. We really enjoyed our refuges, took full advantage of them. Beautiful spot, just these little umbrellas and shade, partial sun. Most days, I would say we're in the 50s in the morning, and probably the 50s up at the passes, maybe low 60s, at the highest elevation. But for much of like the hiking day, it's in the 60s. It was so pleasant. I mean, we were seldom too hot and almost never too cold. It was, temperatures were above average. At this time, July of 2022, Europe was kind of in a heat wave. So Madrid was in the triple digits. Southern France was, but because we were at higher elevation, we were spared the real heat. So we'll go back real quick. From this point, some of us actually took, or some members of the party took a ski lift trail down to Courmayeur. I think it's just kind of done. It was a long, steep descent. On the way down, or once we got down, but before actually getting into Courmayeur, we went through a small village, the name of which escapes me. But I snapped these photos because it was just so, I don't know, idyllic. The cobblestone streets and the kind of narrow streets with the overhanging balconies. And over to the left, on the left photo, you can't quite see it, was a fountain, just like an open air, fountain, which is common. They're all over the place, where you can get, and it's, potable drinking water. Speaking of which, yeah, it was just so cute just walking through this little town before we got to the somewhat larger Courmayeur. Courmayeur is kind of like the Italian Chamonix, just on the other side. I mean, of course, there are a lot of beautiful Italian mountain towns, but it's just sort of Chamonix's kind of counterpart. This is the hotel we stayed at in Courmayeur. It was very modern, very luxurious. Yeah, look, they even let the they left the lights on for us. It was too modern for my taste. I really prefer the simpler, more rustic. You know, this was like totally international. Like it just didn't feel like a trail hotel, if such a thing exists. That's kind of an oxymoronic. But yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you mean the Grand Trail, yeah, the GN, yeah, GTC, Grand Trail, Courmayeur, yeah, okay, so that's why. Got it, yeah. I mean, it was very comfortable. Yeah, I mean, there was like, you could get a spa treatment there, which I think some people did. I'm not sure.
I mean, some people just come in, they don't really intend to hike, they just crash there and that's that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this, especially a larger place like Courmayeur, is a touristy mountain town. So people come there during the winter to ski. People come there, you know, during the summer to hike or to paraglide or to do whatever. So actually, a place like this probably has very few. Probably TMB through hikers constitute a tiny fraction of their clientele. I bet the majority of people are just, you know, other types of tourists.
Enjoying stuff.
Yeah, or the spa or the, you know, veranda. Yeah. So this was an interesting evening. So our first night there, we went into town. My wife Corey as well, but she was probably taking the photograph, and found a little sort of street side cafe, which of course a dime a dozen there. And we had drinks, and you know, we stayed there for dinner, and we had bumped into Marissa, that girl that I mentioned earlier that we saw up at the pass, and welcomed her to join us. And she was traveling solo. She was backpacking the route, staying in, I think she was staying in refuges, not tenting, but she was, you know, carrying all of her food and the rest of her gear and clothing and whatnot. She was not availing herself of a you know, shuttle service like we were. But we sort of like, we kept bumping into her and kind of took her under our wing a little bit. And a couple of funny memories of this little cafe we stayed at. So on their menu, they had pizza. Although I, you know, later find out it wasn't, you know, there's a difference between these cafes and full-on restaurants. You know, a lot of these cafes open up at like 4 in the afternoon after the siesta, and they're open from like 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 or something, but that's not where you get dinner. Dinner is much later at 8, between 8 and 10 at much larger, you know, fancier establishments. But damn it, they had pizza on their menu, and we're like, we had just entered Italy and we wanted pizza. And so we asked the waiter for pizza. His broken English, he was saying, you know, have pizzas, well, but it's on the menu. There we are, Americans expecting, if it's on the menu, you gotta have it, you know. And so anyways, there was some back and forth, and then finally he said, you know, you guys want pizza? I'll get you pizza. And he did get us pizza, but we noticed at one point there was a little alley. They were bringing in boxes of pizza, clearly from somewhere else, and then they brought them out on platters to us. So he got us pizza, all right, but he ordered it from Domino's or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was pretty hilarious. And then also while we were eating the pizza, which we ended up ordering way too much after that whole, you know, like we had filled up on appetizers, and by the time the pizza came out, ironically, you know, they went to these great lengths to get us pizza. We had a lot left over. This single male hiker traveler guy who had some fancy trail name like Captain America, Captain Fantastic, Professor Fantastic, yes. He strode in and he just looked like one of these sort of like bohemian, I need a meal kind of guys. And we had pizza. We offered him pizza, and he kind of entertained us with conversation for you know, half an hour. And that was our first night in Courmayeur. Yes.
But aside from that, so we're talking with Professor Fantastic, and he's telling us all the things that he's done, and how he hiked the Colorado Trail a couple of years earlier. And I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
I said, my friend Katie Barrett hiked that also instead of the AT, which was shut down during the pandemic. And he said, no way, lost and found. That's what trail means.
Oh,
I went to Colorado Trail.
Wow.
I'd forgotten about that. Thanks for sharing that.
We also sent him on the way all the pizza.
I'm sure.
We sent him to
Yes.
camp
Yeah.
out. Take it with you.
Yep. So the following day we had was a built-in rest day. So we had 2 nights and 1 full day in Courmayeur, and we all kind of did different things. Corey and I kind of wandered around town for a little bit. Actually went on a run in the morning. I brought my running shoes just to do it, go for a run in Italy. You know, we relaxed, we slept in a little bit. But our kind of big activity for the day was taking the Skyway Monta Bianca to Punta Helbronner. So this actually connects with Chamonix. You can take this to Punta Helbronner at 11,358 feet. And then you can take another, you know, gondola ride from there across the glacier to Aiguille du Midi, and then take that down to Chamonix. You know, this was like some $150 million project or something like that. They really spare no expense with these things, but it's a huge tourist draw, and it was stunning. I mean, I'm glad I did it. It got us to an elevation that the trail didn't even come close to, and up from the viewing platform, there were actually, I'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, the views were amazing. Let's see, there was something else I wanted to point out. Yes. So you'll notice here it says Monta Bianca. Well, that's what they call Mont Blanc in Italy. And there's been a long-standing, like literally centuries-old argument over whether the peak is split exactly between France and Italy, or whether France owns the peak entirely. Still hasn't been resolved. And in fact, there is no precise border, because it depends on the amount of snowpack or which way the wind is blowing. I mean, it's a shifting border. The summit of Mont Blanc is at any given moment under 20 to 30 feet of snow. So even there's some, but apparently it goes back, into Renaissance times about, but it just, even if, let's say in theory, France does own the peak, that doesn't stop the Italians from at least claiming, putting their own name on it. The structure on the left was the halfway mark of the cable car ride from Courmayeur up to Helbronner, and this skyway climbed a total of over 7,000 feet from Courmayeur, which I think was around 4,000 feet. That would make sense. Yeah, low 4,000 feet to Punta Helbronner. Incredibly steep. I mean, at times 45-degree angle or more. And this is the view of the glacier, one of the many glaciers from the top. Actually, you can see that one cable car there, and then you kind of lose sight of it. That goes across to the other sort of high promontory, one of the other promontories over there, that then takes the cable car all the way down to Chamonix. So once we got up here, I actually disobeyed the rules, and I climbed down a ladder that only mountaineers and their clients are supposed to take, that actually gets you down onto the glacier. But it was worth it. It was really cool. There's a nice panoramic of these beautiful terraces that extended sort of beyond the kind of rock structure that we were bolted to. Let's see, did that other photo show? Yeah, so although that may have been one of the halfway points, I don't Yeah, that must have been one of the halfway points. That wasn't the summit, I don't think. Or maybe it was. But anyways, the sort of visitor center up there, that's it there, at least the parts of it, had like a wraparound veranda where you could walk around and see the mountains, a view of the mountains in every direction. And they even, they had the telescopes and the, naming, what peaks you're looking at. And we were actually able to see, what's it? Not the Eiger, the Matterhorn from there, which was really cool. I actually spotted that before looking at the map. I knew that in theory we could probably see it from there. And there it was, looking every bit the kind of, iconic pyramid that it is.
With all those gondolas, do the winds ever get so high that they have to say, oh, this is a really bad day, we're not going to take them out today?
I'm sure. And John, was it you who was mentioning to me earlier? Maybe, who was
that was
Bill? Yes,
That was Bill.
that
Yeah,
people got stranded there.
yes, we took that gondola. But 2 days later, we learned that people had become stranded in high winds there overnight, some of them, until they were rescued. These aren't big gondolas. It's like 4-person gondolas, so quite cramped there.
Now the Skyway that we took up to Punta Helbronner, 30 or even 40 person. I mean, that was really big. Yeah. And it's almost like a helicopter cockpit where the glass is curved like this, so you can see not only across, but kind of below you a little bit. So that's just a different perspective of Mont Blanc. And it was neat to see it from so high up. You were up in the mountain. You weren't just like looking up at the mountains, you were in them. Half the people in the gondola ride or the Skyway, had the full-on mountaineering regalia and the ropes and crampons and everything else. Obviously a booming, guided sort of glacial travel and mountaineering business up there. Anybody guess who the guy on the right is, the sculptor? Well, we are in Italy, so think famous Italian mountaineers. Yes, the greatest mountaineer of them all. Yep. And the second greatest on the left. So, Carla mentioned this. On night 2 in Courmayeur, there was a trail race, 3 of them actually. There was a 100K, a 55K, and a 30K. The Grand Trail Courmayeur. Not for the faint of heart. I do a lot of 5Ks and 10Ks and even a half marathon, but I cannot fathom doing a 100K race on that kind of terrain, going up, half a dozen, 3,000 to 4,000 foot climb, passes on that kind of terrain. But I didn't know, maybe someone at our party knew that this race was taking place then. I had no idea. Corey and I were just wandering around town, and we noticed that there was like a sign up place. It was obviously they had the infrastructure for some kind of race, and so we came back later in the evening to watch the start of the race, and it was a really cool experience. There was a great vibe there, kind of buzzing with anxiety and energy and excitement, and a lot of racers, hundreds of racers, and they had people on the microphone, getting really animated and whipping the crowd into a frenzy. And I know Corey remarked there were a lot of really nice looking legs. But it was cool. And we stayed there for a couple hours, just kind of watching the whole thing. And it's getting dark. Everyone's kind of getting excited. And then at a certain point, they all turned their headlamps on. And that was just moments before the starting gun. Then in the morning, the following, right. Yep, the following morning. So I think a 30K might be feasible. I was thinking, what? So this is the following day. Another climb up, I mean, fairly steep because we were coming from a pretty deep valley that Courmayeur sits in. So we had a pretty steep climb up out of the valley. And as we were climbing, as Carla mentioned, the runners from the 30K who had started that morning as well, started passing us. So it was also kind of neat to experience that part of it. And, you know, of course, we were, you know, moving over frequently to let them pass. But it was neat to see them, you know, in the act of racing. Here are actually some of the runners here. I think this is a fountain where they're filling up on water. Some more alpine meadows and wildflowers. This was another day where some of us took a variant. There was a kind of a high road and a low road. By all accounts, both were absolutely beautiful. I took the high road, but I think you couldn't really go wrong with either one. Yeah, just, I mean, we are now around kind of the backside of Mont Blanc. I don't actually know if that's Mont Blanc or not. I feel like it's not. That's a satellite peak. But you know, every day you just saw another aspect of the big mountain that you were going around. I like this photo on the right here because you can kind of see this little trail disappear around that, you know, that slope. You know, it just gives you a sense of the scale. The trail is so tiny and insignificant. This one here kind of reminds me of the Grand Tetons, just the shape of it. So another refuge that we stopped at along the way, and this refuge will be remembered for something unique that took place there. So that girl, Marissa, who we had been kind of leapfrogging for the past few days, while we were in Courmayeur, she started feeling unwell. And she kind of powered through it. But I know that following day, the day that we were, well, this morning, we were, you know, hiking along with the 30K runners. Apparently I think some people had talked to her and she was not feeling well at all, feeling pretty sick. And when I got to this refuge, Refugio Walter Bonatti, she was being tended to by some, you know, paramedics or nurses or some, you know, somebody with a medical background. And within moments, a helicopter appeared just out of nowhere, just all of a sudden, you know, landed in a tiny little helicopter pad right by the refuge, scooped her up and was gone. And turns out she had COVID. Yeah. What? Yeah. So we were, you know, and this was like her big trip of the year. I forget if she was still in school, or I feel like she may have been still in school, maybe graduate school or something. But she did like one big trip like this a year, which is very adventurous. She went all over the place. But to see it, you know, cut short, we really felt bad for her.
She was headed to Switzerland after that. So she got
Yeah.
one night in the hospital, and then they discharged her to.
But-
COVID was happening.
Right.
She had to stay at that hotel until.
Like 5 days or something, or 7 days, or yeah.
Ultimately, we saw her on our last one in Chamonix, when they just kicked her free in Italy. She
Huh.
traveled back to Chamonix.
Oh, you guys. Oh, okay. I didn't know you guys saw her. Corey and I had probably left already.
Yes,
No.
yes, I think you guys had left that day, and we were
Yeah.
there for one more day, and as
Yep.
we were getting back to the hotel,
Huh.
for the final out.
Yeah.
we crossed paths with her, and they had just kicked her free. Ultimately, she did make it to Switzerland. Not
Justin?
Yeah.
Could you repeat what she's saying for the Zoom audience?
Yes. So Marissa, who was taken away on a helicopter and I guess later determined that it was for COVID, had to spend a night or two in a hospital and then about a week in like a COVID hotel until she was cleared to go. And then she eventually was able to resume at least some of her travels. I don't think she completed the TMB, but she was able to do some additional traveling. And some members of our party met up with her on their last day in Chamonix. But this sort of whole helicopter incident was kind of good time to mention how much how many helicopters there are in this area and how much air traffic there is. So, the Alps are a phenomenal place to go for so many reasons, many of which I've already described, but they're not a place to go if you don't want any air traffic. Helicopters are everywhere. They're at any given day, we probably heard 3, 4, 5, 6 helicopters just buzzing around, some dropping off supplies. We saw some with the big, ropes, tethering a huge, crate of, supplies. And I'm sure very often picking up sick or stranded hikers too, but they're all over the place.
Did you guys have mountain rescue insurance?
We had trip insurance, which was mandated by Pygmy-Elephant, the outfitter. I did not have any kind of mountain rescue insurance.
Some of the trip insurance are
Covered, yeah.
Based on the elevation, whether or not we use traction devices.
True, that was whether we're using traction devices was a thing. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was tailored to what we were doing. So maybe if one of us went like severely off script, they're like, hey, you weren't supposed to be doing that. We're not going to cover all of this. I don't know.
So it looks like a lot of folks were using trail runner shoes as opposed to hiking boots. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I didn't really talk about gear at all. I brought 2 options to hike in. I brought a pair of mid-weight hiking boots that are waterproof for poor weather. My feet tend to get cold easily, so to keep my feet warm, dry, and in case the terrain was, really rough. I did wear them occasionally, but by and large, I wore something like this, a trail runner, lightweight. We had excellent weather, so getting your feet wet and cold was not an issue. And the trails are so well worn. I mean, there were rocky sections, but we also had a day pack, so it's different. At least for me, if I'm carrying a 60-pound pack, I want really heavy-duty boots because I sprained my ankle. I've got another. Now I'm a lot heavier. I'm gonna, I could injure myself. If I just have 15 pounds on my back, I'm much more comfortable in sneakers. So pretty much all of us hiked in trail sneakers.
How about water crossings? Any wet water crossings where take shoes off and cross or?
Almost none. I mean, a lot of the creeks and things had little bridges across them. Yeah. Carla, can you think of any? No. Yeah.
Justin, there's a question if there's any ladders or chains on this hike.
Yes, on the last day. Yep, and I've got some photos of that. Ladders or chains. Yes.
Just
Yep.
how expensive would it, like this poor girl, Marissa, she would have been hit with a bill probably to take that helicopter?
I have no idea.
She didn't have trip insurance.
I mean,
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, because there was certainly no negligence on her part. It wasn't like she was attempting some sort of mountaineering route she had no business doing and had to be rescued. There can be issues around that if there's gross negligence. But you don't have much control over whether you get COVID. I was actually surprised they helicoptered her out and didn't just sort of walk her out. But
For in this country, if you have an ambulance come, you know what I'm saying? You get hit with a
yeah,
bill. So.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's a very.
No idea.
Service if you're abroad like that.
Yeah.
There seems to be agreement from several people back there that you do pay in your.
Okay.
It's on you to pay for getting rescued.
Huh.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I wonder how it turned out for her because. Yeah. That could be expensive. I have no idea what a helicopter ride and the personnel to do it cost, but yeah. Yeah. Huh. All right. So we passed a lot of old, farm and herding structures along the route. They were really cute. Almost all of them were stone. Oftentimes the roofs themselves were, I'd hate to call it slate because they were flat stones, but they were a good 4 or 5 inches thick, but kind of in that slate tile style. But a lot of these, some abandoned, potentially some of them still in use, but such a rich herding, farming and herding culture and history in this part of the world. So this was our accommodation, Chalet Val Ferret, or let's see, no, we're still in Italy, yeah. This was a beautiful little spot. It was very quiet. It was right on the trail. And since we had taken, many of us had taken different variants, we all sort of got spread out and all kind of trickled in to this chalet at different times. And this was their little sort of yard, their little meadow in front of the chalet, where we all took a seat. I remember when I came in, there were 4 or 5 people already seated, like, hey, come on, grab a drink, sit down. It was just lovely. And we just had a very leisurely afternoon. And the chalet itself, although we did have, I think for the most part, private, rooms or doubles or whatever, it was much simpler. You can see the inside here was super quaint, the exposed woodwork. It had, the lobby had a couple of small sofas and a wood burning stove. It was actually somewhat chilly that day, one of the cooler days. And so we all kind of huddled around it, kind of taking turns on the sofa. It was very cozy, very quaint. The food was excellent. I think I said that already. So the next day, on the trail again, heading up to another call. And on this call, we entered Switzerland. There's Amy doing her happy dance. And the, border crossings were pretty much all marked with like a simple monument like that, simple stone monument. There was nobody checking passports, nothing there. I mean, it was so pleasant to just walk into another country and not have to go through customs, not have to answer for yourself, My wife there befriended a whole group of Israelis and took their photo a few times, and then I think they convinced her to jump in there with them. But there are groups of people from all over doing this hike. Really very, very diverse place. That's one of the wonderful things about it. I mean, one of the employees at the refuge is Greek. It's just people from all over Europe, all over the world. So we're in Switzerland now, descending through just classic, alpine meadows. I think where we spent the night was somewhere in that little, in that valley. Cowbells, it's just absolutely classic. That is the little hotel where we stayed that night. Had a beautiful little sort of courtyard out back that we relaxed in. Now this place, let's see, I think I had a private room, but I think some people bunked with others. It was also really just a charming little place, not too modern, not too ostentatious, right along the trail. Another pretty little chapel. And there was a rushing, glacially fed creek just outside the little sort of chalet's door that many of us went to cool our feet in. Oh yes, it was cold. Well, my thought, actually, the reason we went down there, some of us went down there in the first place, that's my wife. My legs don't look nearly as nice as that. Was Jing, one of the members of our party, had tweaked her ankle on the descent, and I think somebody mentioned, we should put that in ice. Where no, there's ice water, 100 feet away. So some of us soaked our feet in that just for reduce the inflammation. And on the right, you can see we're obviously really disappointed with our desserts. I don't remember what we had for dessert, but I do somehow recall it was exceptional that night, which means, knowing me, it was probably something that had chocolate in it. So the following day, we passed, in the morning, we passed, a herd of goats and some farmers, kind of moving their pasture, just some small working farming, herding operation. And this day was exceptional in that we didn't go up and over any passes. We actually went down. We descended most of the day. We had started pretty high and we descended very gradually. It wasn't steep. And we went through a lot of small villages. We kind of crisscrossed across a stream. We often went down a small road, but it was kind of like the village experience as opposed to the mountain experience. And I think for many of us, it was a highlight because as you know, absolutely stunning as the mountains are, equally stunning is the quaint little villages that you travel through and the goats and the cows with bells and whatnot that you see along the way. So this was an especially exciting experience. We were walking along this road, quiet, you know, local road, occasional car would pass, and we heard the sound of the cowbells, which again was totally common at this point, nothing unusual. Except this time they were a little louder and it sounded like they were coming toward us. And as we kept walking down this road, you know, they got louder and louder, and we were kind of rounding a bend. And somebody said, I think the cows are running. And then we went a little further and they said, oh my God, they are running. And sure enough, this herd of hundreds of cows, and I think actually mainly steer, came running toward us, taking up the entire width of the road. Didn't show really much interest in taking a wide berth around the, you know, tourists walking down the road in the other direction. But there was a guy out in front here who was running at a good clip. He was, you know, front man, and then there was various people kind of corralling them and clapping them and keeping them going on. But it was really cool. There were hundreds of them. But this was obviously, you know, they were moving the cows to greener fields or pastures. But this will forever be the running of the bulls. Yeah, you know, French style. Well, actually, no, we are in Italy, but yeah. No, we're in Switzerland. You're right. Yeah. So not exactly like what they have in Madrid, but it was a really, really cool experience. Actually, there we go. You can see on the road, they're not very modest. I think they're something about the running speeds their metabolism along. Yeah, these are mostly steer. In fact, I think they're all steer. You see, we were along the left here. You see that bull coming. Yeah. Oh, look, that one was kind. That was gracious, but I think some of us were like, oh. And we sauntered into this little town of La Follette, where some of those stragglers were still kind of coming through the town when we got there. And there was a little kind of gift shop, small sort of supermarket in that town. And lo and behold, they had souvenirs, you know, including cowbells. So it was like, you know, perfect commercial timing, you know. I was joking with someone earlier, you know, maybe they know the tourists come down from that chalet around, you know, 9:30 every morning. So move the cows then, because then they'll have had this amazing experience. They'll want to buy, you know, the cowbell in the store. There's Larry hamming it up with a marmot. Yes. Good question. So the question is, could we use euros everywhere, and what about credit cards? Yes, we could use euros euros everywhere, even in Switzerland. Although they still prefer using the franc there. They officially haven't switched to euros, but they'll still use them. But France and Italy, yeah, euro all the way. And you could use credit cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Justin, we have a question from Zoom
Sure.
about the if you know what the language was being used in Switzerland. In
French. Yeah, so,
French.
yep, so the language, it's the French-speaking part of Switzerland. So we really only experienced two languages on this trip, French and Italian. What I will say is when we were in Switzerland, some of the signage was also in German, but nobody spoke German. It was the French-speaking part of Switzerland. Nobody spoke Romanic. Is that the fourth language? Either. You know, Switzerland has 4 languages, although there's the big 3, and then there's Romanic or something like that, that like 1% of the population speaks. So later that morning, we came upon a little crepe shack called La Cabana. And this was like, this thing was heaven sent. I love crepes to begin with. It was the size of a hot dog stand, you know, a little lunch truck. And it was just beautiful. It was warm. There was Bob Marley playing on the radio, and we got crepes. It was like, we weren't even hungry yet. We just had breakfast an hour and a half earlier, but it was just delicious. It was awesome. You know what? I'm going to quickly take the opportunity to say, I don't know of, and I know there's probably quite some travelers here who have been to many parts of the world, but I don't know of any place in the world that combines world-class stunning mountain scenery and hiking with world-class food and beverages and these cultural experiences. It's like you are living in what's typically 2 separate worlds simultaneously. But, you know, the Alps have been, you know, they're still, the peaks are still, you know, unbelievably beautiful and challenging and everything. But the Alps have been inhabited and, you know, grazed and farmed and everything for, you know, thousands of years. So you have this civilization that exists, you know, concurrently with the mountains. You certainly don't find it in the Rockies or the Sierra Nevada or other places, or the, you know, the Alaska range. You have wilderness in abundance, but you don't have the culture, the towns, the civilization. This is another one of those pretty little fountains. They were all over the place. And, you know, you can see these houses here. They're simple, but they're beautiful. You know, they have planters and flower boxes, and everybody really takes care of their houses. Even this bridge, probably the person who puts those flowers there isn't paid to do it. You know, they just do it because it you know, it makes their town beautiful. You know, makes them that much more proud to live there. So we really loved wandering through these little towns. At the end of the day's hike, or near the end, so we did kind of come to a low point in this valley. We did have a climb. It wasn't anything crazy, maybe 1,500 feet. And halfway up the climb, we came across a cave, which I don't think any of us were expecting. So it's kind of a cool little diversion. The last part of the climb was, you know, through a forest, and there were all these cute little carvings. And this is just 2 of several. You know, ibex on the left, I guess that's a mushroom on the right, but there were a whole bunch of these cute little carvings. And that was the day's destination, Hotel Splendide in Champex. And over to the right there, it kind of looks blue, but that's just because the balusters and the railings get really close together. But there was this veranda courtyard that kind of jutted out onto this cliffside. It was really, really steep. And so it was kind of a steep drop, but you just had this super, you know, commanding view out to, I'm not quite sure what direction. Oh, west. We were looking west at that point. But Hotel Splendide, we all really loved it. It was very kind of Italianate or maybe even Victorian, kind of very old-fashioned, fancy. Had a beautiful, you know, dining room. There's a panorama of the view from that kind of courtyard area. That was a view from my room. That was literally open the curtains, snap photo. Yeah, that's almost alpenglow there. Yeah, it was
Evening or morning?
pretty sure that was evening. Yeah.
Do you take pictures, are they just taken with an iPhone, are you taking them with a camera?
So the question is, what type of device were these photos taken on? The majority of these photos were taken on my wife's iPhone, insert number after iPhone. I don't know, iPhone 38. No, they haven't got there, have you? Have they? 13 maybe? I don't know. An iPhone that takes good photos. And I took a handful of them, and some of them I took from some group photos that we all shared after the trip. But I think pretty much, Carla, did anybody have like a old-fashioned photo with lenses and all that? Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people were using phones though. Yeah. With a real camera. Yeah. So this is the following day from Champex to Trient, all within Switzerland. And on this day, there was a variant, kind of the mother of all variants. And about half of us decided to do the variant, myself included. And it started innocently enough along just a pretty little creek. We actually passed the base of a ski area, I think, which was not that remarkable because they're everywhere. But this variant brought us to the highest elevation on the entire trip, around 8,700 feet. And it was steeper and more challenging than any other of the other calls or passes that we went up. I have a few more photos of it to give you a sense of what it was like. This is about halfway up. We had left the low country behind. We were seriously climbing, but we hadn't gotten to the steepest section yet. So this was an unbroken 4,000-foot climb to the pass, and extremely steep up at the top. So to give you a sense of scale, so so it was extremely rocky, as you can see. There was a whole stretch of about close to a mile, maybe even more than a mile. We were just kind of boulder hopping, hands, feet, lowering yourself, climbing up, pretty much a scramble. But to give you a sense of scale, so there's a hiker, there's another hiker, the section from where kind of the rocks disappear and it looks like it's grass from there to the top, that was probably 1,000 vertical feet at least a 45 or 50 degree slope. I mean, you're switchbacking, and with every step you're kicking boulders down. So you're giving people like 40, 50 feet, and every once in a while somebody calls, hey, boulder, you're looking up and making sure it's not going to hit you in the head. It was something. I know my wife Corey it was probably the steepest, hardest climb she's done. And then at the top, here's getting up to the very top. It was steep. But it was thrilling. It was exciting. And at the top, unlike the other passes, which were these wide sort of benches, these shelves, these saddles actually, where there's plenty of space to sit down and whatever, this was just a notch, a little cleft in the rocks. You can see that's just that little sort of standing room only right there. So it really, even though we may only have been about 1,000 feet higher than the other passes, it felt qualitatively different. Here's another example of how we were not so much looking up at the glacier anymore as we were looking just directly across at it. And in some cases down at it. There's some other photos, where you're actually looking down. What was that? There was still signage, and it was pretty clear there wasn't anywhere else you could go. I mean, well, okay, there was one place, that rocky section before you got to that final steep, what looked like grassy, but was really rubbly climb. There was actually a couple places where we strayed, 50 or 100 feet from the actual trail because it all looked the same. It was just a sea of rocks. It's like, I'm sure most of you have been to like Blue Rocks or River Rocks or one of these places here, in Pennsylvania. It was like that. So it's kind of like pick your route. There's no route that's better than the other. This here is the Glacier du Trient, which if you go back, we're seeing the upper part of it, but then it kind of tumbles down the mountain. And that, again, that picture on the left just kind of gives you a sense of that immense scale. And also how steep the trail was. On the right here, you have a cliff on one side and a drop off 50 degrees on the other. It was, slippery. It was, we had to really go slowly. I know Corey had to do a lot of pep talking to herself that it was okay and we weren't going to fall and go cascading down to our death. Looking down at some members of our party, Mike and Jing, hiking down. There's part of that glacier. You can see in some of these photos how much the glacier has receded. So that's now the foot of the glacier. And all of this is just rock. And it hasn't really revegetated because this glacier has receded so recently. Oh yeah, here's a good one. That's just like a close-up of that right there. And the toe of glacier is so cool because it's all convoluted and corrugated and crevassed, and there's all these wild things where they come to a terminus. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was that day, even though we were up at 8,700 feet, it was like 70 degrees. No wonder the glaciers are melting. You're at 8,700 feet in the Alps, it should be like 45, Yeah, I mean, my wife and I have been talking about going to Glacier one of these days, Glacier National Park, that is, because we're not going to be around much longer. I was there in the 90s, thank goodness. And I mean, we're already receding then, but yeah, if you have a northern climate, a place with snow and ice features, you've been wanting to go to, yeah, don't prolong it because they're melting fast. So, and we made it down to Trient, and those of us who took the variant, met up with those who hadn't taken the variant, who had, major climbs of their own, and got to this Hotel Grand Bear or Ours in Trient. And this was more of a hostel-like accommodation. So I know I was in a quad. I think others were also in quads, but bathrooms were like down the hall, almost like a dormitory style accommodation. Really pretty building and a nice little sort of like quasi outbuilding with a bar and a nice hangout spot. That was the sort of mess hall. So I think that's the only other, so Jing, myself, Carla, Mike, Marcy, Julie, Amy, Larry, Lisa, and Dave. And Corey's probably taking the photograph. So the following day, I don't have any photographs of the ascent, but we started in a valley and climbed up to another mountain pass, about another 3,000 foot climb. That was kind of the standard. And this is Refuge de la Baume, something like that. I don't know. Okay. It was very, it was very windy. Yeah. This was pretty much right. This was pretty much right at the board. I have a photo of the little monument in a moment. Yeah. Yep. So this is where we re-entered France. And then if you picture that map again, we are now at the northeasternmost point. So we started kind of in the west, went down, made that acute turn. Now we're at the northeasternmost point. So not only have we re-entered France, but we're turning again. We're kind of on the home stretch at this point. Yep, there's the simple monument. Some of us also kind of split up a bit that day. Some took a bit more of a valley route, and some stayed kind of along a bit of crest or ridgeline, just knocking that thing off. Let's just swip. There we go. Yeah. Looks like cotton, but I can't imagine it was. What? Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Just and you know, it was another sunny day. I mean, like every day was like this. It was really unreal. So that night's accommodations were in Argentière, which is a small village just a few miles up the valley from Chamonix. So we now had kind of come back into that valley with Chamonix and Les Ouches and the other towns. So it was nice. We were in a little town. There was a little sort of plaza across the street where we had some drinks and hung out. The hotel was pretty nice view. This is a view from the hotel, so we could see Mont Blanc again, kind of looking down the valley. So the next day was our final hiking day. So as I think I mentioned earlier, it was the trip was 12 days total, not including any kind of days spent in Geneva or Chamonix prior to the beginning of the hike or after the hike ended. So 12 days total with the one off day in Courmayeur, so 11 days of hiking. So the following day was our final day of hiking. And for many people, it was perhaps what they had most looked forward to and feared simultaneously, because there was an iron rung section, a section of chains, ladders, bolts in the rock, steps, you know, very engineered, almost a miniature Via Ferrata. So I think Corey is kind of gathering her strength there by that cool little pointy rock, you know, before heading to the iron rungs. Here's the beginning of it, you know, very steep. I mean, you know, it was a steep drop off. If you lost your footing, it would not have been good. There would have been helicopters involved. And here's the first section of ladders. And this is actually the only photos I or Corey or Marcy, from whom I got some of these photos, had of the ladder section. I think because everybody put their damn cameras away and focused on grabbing onto the iron the rungs. There we are, triumphant after having completed the Via Ferrata. Yeah. This was another little variant, well, a refuge, but on another little variant to Lac Blanc, a little alpine lake with a beautiful kind of view of Mont Blanc. And if you position yourself a certain way on the lake, you can get that kind of mirror or reflection effect. But what made, at least for me, the kind of takeaway or the most memorable thing from this day generally, but specifically Lac Blanc and the refuge there, is the number of people that were there. So at this point, we're into mid-July. So we're getting into the real heart of the tourism season. Early July is still kind of early for in a typical year for the TMB. So not only are we getting into the full, you know, like the rush hour traffic of the TMB hikers, but you could take a cable car to Les Brevant and take a day hike of only a few miles to this location. So it was flooded with day hikers. We saw hundreds of people on that day. We saw as many people on this day as we did on the trail on all the other days combined. It's a bit of culture shock, because not like we had been in the wilderness. We've been seeing people every day, but it was a nice kind of slow, steady, you know, person here, a person there, a group of hikers. This was just was mobbed. It was like climbing up Mount Washington. You get to the summit. You've had the mountain to yourself for a few hours. You get to the summit. There's everybody there who went up the Cog Railway. It's a total culture shock. So there's people. I mean, these tiny little dots are all just surrounded with people. I mean, it was beautiful. And then this is looking the other way across the lake at, you know, Mont Blanc and some of the other peaks. Then from here, we had about a 4 to 5 mile kind of traverse to Plan Praz, which is where we first started the hike, where we had, on that first day, we had taken the gondola ride up to Plan Praz and started climbing from there. So we took that very gondola ride back down into Chamonix. So the last few miles were just kind of traversing, and it was a pretty warm day. The trail was dusty, and I wasn't feeling great, but I figured I'd had just a few too many beers to drink the previous night, which objectively I had. But turns out that was my first day of being symptomatic for COVID, and I didn't know it. I was just weary without any explanation. It's like hiking is usually easy for me. It's like hiking was hard that day.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. You know what amazed me so much about the Alps is Mont Blanc is only a little bit more than 1,000 feet higher than Mount Whitney or Mount Elbert. But look at it. It looks 20,000 feet higher. I mean, it's Himalayan, you know, because tree line's so much lower, because it is covered in thousands of glaciers and permanent ice fields. You don't get that in the Rockies. You have to go up to way up to British Columbia to get that. You don't get that in the Sierra Nevada. You know, you get small glaciers, you get ice fields, snow fields, but this is just totally different. There's Dave feigning a smile. He was not fond of the gondola rides. I mean, I think he appreciated them for what they did, but I don't think he's crazy about heights. Yeah, yeah. His white, you can't see his right hand, but trust me, it's white knuckling. Yeah. And here we are back in at Hotel Morgan in Chamonix. So for Corey and me, that would be our last night in Chamonix. And the following day in the afternoon, we took that Alpi bus back to Geneva. For most everyone else, they had a full day in Chamonix and then left the following day for Geneva or wherever else. Here we are after having gotten showers. So end of the final day of the trip, showers. You see the boxes of pizza, the open beer and wine. We're all, you know, in sandals or barefoot. We're all checking our phones. It's like classic, you know, end of trip. Like,
Did you have any cell phone reception once you got outside of Chamonix?
we did. Now I kept my phone off. You know, I put my wife in charge of all phone related connectivity. She checked in with our various family members who might or might not have been worried about us. I'm like, nope, this is vacation. The phone stays off. I think we got a surprisingly good reception. Carla, do you remember? Like,
I mean, I think most of us had them off most of the time, but when we got to some of the refugees, when we were higher up, you know, we're more likely to send a picture out, you know, kind of live to where we were. It was really nice.
And you could recharge your devices as well.
yeah, yeah. Although of course in Europe they have different plugs,
Yeah.
so you have to. Well, see, before we left on this trip, you know, I was, you know, kind of asking around who had the international or the European connectors. And my dad said, oh yeah, I have them. And so he gave me a bag with them. Well, they must have been from the 1970s. They didn't work. So we borrowed, somebody had an extra one. It was probably Larry, you know, the ultimate GPS guy, had probably a bunch of extra chargers. Speaking of Larry, winner of the best sock tan goes to. So here are some stats. You know, you can see the elevation chart looks like an EKG chart or EKG readout. So about 110 miles, elevation somewhere between 30 and 40,000 feet. That would be 30 to 40,000 feet gain and 40 to 40,000 feet loss. 12 days total hiking, 12 total days, 11 days hiking. And what's interesting is the 110 miles is approximately the number of bottles of wine that we consumed. And the 30K mile elevation is about the distance of baguettes, if you put them end on end, that we consumed. On many people's full day off at the end of the trip in Chamonix, as I mentioned, my wife and I had to leave that day, but most people had a full day. Some people did some shopping, some relaxing, whatever. Carla and Amy went paragliding. And there you can see, I mean, they just look like little birds, like they look like, brightly colored, buzzards, catching thermals. But, and we noticed this even the first day we were there. Paragliders are everywhere. You look up at any given moment on a nice day in Chamonix or in summer, you look up and the sky is full of paragliders, just doing these gentle, really catching thermals. And Carla could certainly tell you more about it if she wants, but I did include a photo of Amy taking off, and she actually took off at the place where we had first gotten the cable car ride up. That was kind of a jumping off point for the. So Amy is there in the purple, I think. Yeah. I'm gonna play that again. At some point, you just have to trust, because otherwise you're just jumping off the edge of the mountain. Of how her legs are, kicking out. You guys had a lot of fun, didn't you? I want to do that. I mean, Corey and I didn't have enough time, but at some point.
A lot of the time I was flying above her or along, she took off first, I took off 2 minutes behind her. So I was actually able to get some shots of her.
Yeah.
Larry, in the meantime, Larry took the lift up with us and took those pictures and videos of us launching. Larry then took the gondola back down, ran through village through some lady's yard who's hollering at him in French.
Yeah.
15 minutes. Yeah, you have to have one. No. Yeah, we're up there. You have a pilot. It's tandem. You have somebody with you. Okay. And they're doing all the steering.
Yeah, you can see. How do I go back? So the guy behind her, they're in tandem. So presumably he knows what he's doing. Yeah, so Corey and I went to Geneva that afternoon and walked around town a little bit, got dinner, which was very disappointing. Well, I had been told to try something called rushti, which is a traditional Swiss meal, like a potatoy, eggy kind of meal. It was sort of bland, and she got fondue, which is also bland. I guess fondue is bland, but yes. Yes, I mean it was good, but it was like, how much just cheese and bread do you want? It feels like a couple bites and then all right, I'm ready for something different. Anyways, I never. Well, actually, I think I was in Geneva once as a kid, but I hadn't been as an adult. I remember seeing the Credit Suisse Bank while we were there in kind of Bankers Row in Geneva, which has been recently in the news. Nope. So that night in the hotel, so we spent the night at a hotel right by the Geneva airport because we had an early morning flight. I decided to test myself because they had stopped the testing requirement for re-entry to the US only a few weeks prior to our departure on this trip. Otherwise, yes, otherwise I would have had to test and do that whole video thing so they can verify or to go to a pharmacy or something. And I wouldn't have been, I would have been in a COVID hotel for a while. But, we had been gone for 16 days and my 6-year-old son, who was 5 then, had been kind of passed around from grandparent to grandparent, but we had to get home. And I also wanted to know if I was bringing COVID home to him because I had been, that last day of hiking, I wasn't feeling great. And then the following day, well, that day really, the day that we then went from Chamonix to Geneva, I had the sniffles and I was definitely feeling sick, mild, but sick nonetheless. So I wanted to test so we knew, like my wife and I knew what we were going to come up with some plan when we got home, what room I was going to sleep in, how we were going to deal with everything. And so sure enough, positive, although my wife tested and she was still negative, but I remember as soon as we find out, I'm freaking sleeping with a mask and we're like facing different directions in bed for whatever, that's worth. And that night I had a dream that we were on the flight back to the US and somebody, I don't know if it was the captain or the steward or stewardess, flight attendant, who came up to me and like stopped the flight. And we had like redirected it because I had COVID. I was like in deep shit. Because, and all in my dream, the cleaning crew who were in our hotel the morning after we left saw the positive test that I chucked in the little waste receptacle and somehow figured out, all right, these were, figured out our names and figured out what flight we were on, called the, So thankfully that never happened. But, I was totally sick and symptomatic in that flight. I just wore that N95 close to my mask the entire time. I remember going to the bathroom. It was a fairly long flight. I remember going to the bathroom a couple times and just taking it off just for a moment, but actually, all of those people had flight issues on the way to Europe. Well, we had a flight issue on the way back. We showed up to Geneva. And of course we had like gone online and made sure everything is still, nothing was canceled because our return flight was going to Geneva, Heathrow, Philly. Even though on the way to Europe, we were Philly, Madrid, Geneva. So we get to the airport and flight to Heathrow is canceled. No warning. So we ended up getting a direct flight from Geneva to JFK, which suited me just fine. And originally they were trying to get us then from JFK to Philly, but there were no flights. So then they could get us from Newark to Philly. I'm like, what? Well, we still have to get from JFK to Newark. At that point, let's just we'll handle getting from JFK to Chester County, Pennsylvania. Like, just get us to JFK. But yeah, I was super symptomatic. So very cautious. But there was one silver lining, and that is I slept like a log.
Yeah.
It's obviously not me here, but I can never sleep on flights, except apparently if I have COVID, unless I have COVID. So that was about it. That's it for my slideshow.
As we were heading to Geneva the next day, we had a couple other people not feeling well. And when they got home that night, I think 2 more tested positive, and then partners of all 3 of those single people.
Eventually, yes.
tested
It was like in the
positive.
coming days, we were all like, not texting, but WhatsApping each other. And it was like, every day it was like, I tested positive too, I'm still negative. Oh, nope, I'm positive now. Yeah. Possibly from her, or, there was group dining everywhere and the thing is, our exposure was high. And this is an international tourist destination where people are coming and going. Nobody was wearing masks. Leading up to the trip, my wife and I were wearing masks religiously because we didn't want to do anything to, put our trip in peril or jeopardize the trip. But once we got there, we're like, we're just going to enjoy vacation, and what happens, happens. So, and fortunately it happened near the end, and not at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So Justin, thank you for a wonderful program. Thank you for, it looks like a great step right up to that last part there.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful to hear about it. And for those of you who haven't been there, now you have sort of a virtual version and maybe you'll go do one on the road at some point. Could we save the questions? I think Justin will stay around and if you have some questions, maybe you could address them. And thank you all for being here this evening. Stay tuned for what's happening next month. That'll be coming out on the website in another weeks. We have lots of goodies over there. Special thanks to our folks who did the baking, Sax and Holly and Linda. And make sure you go over and enjoy some goodies and hope to see you next month. Thank you again.
Thank you.